Man, Nate Dogg wasn't just another voice, he was the voice. That deep, soulful tone that could turn any street anthem into a timeless classic. From Regulate to the next episode, if Nate was on the hook, you knew it was a hit, no question. But behind that smooth delivery and calm presence was a man who never truly got the flowers he deserved. While Snoop and Dre became household names, Nate stayed in the background, the heartbeat of the West Coast sound that defined an entire generation. So how did one of hip-hop's most recognizable voices fade away from the spotlight? And what really happened to the King of Hooks? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Man, let's roll back the tape to where it all started for Nate Dogg, because this journey, it's wild, it's real, and it shows how the voice of the streets was born straight out of the church. Nate was born Nathaniel Dwayne Hale on the 19th of August, 1969, in Long Beach, California. Some people mention Mississippi, but Long Beach, that's where he grew up. That's where the story truly begins. His father was a pastor. His mother sang in the church choir. So, from the time he could walk, Nate was surrounded by hymns, gospel chords, and that deep Southern spirituality that stuck with him forever. He didn't learn music from the streets first, he learned it from the Spirit. Every Sunday, little Nate stood up in the pews of New Hope Baptist Church, singing his heart out. Folks would stop what they were doing just to listen. That boy had a voice that felt like sunshine through stained glass, smooth, rich, and powerful. The congregation loved him, but nobody could have guessed that same church kid would later be known as the King of Hooks. But outside the church walls, it was a whole different story. Long Beach in the late 1970 and early 1980 was no easy place. Poverty, street politics, gang culture, you name it. While other kids dreamed about basketball or fast cars, Nate was learning to balance survival with soul. You see, that tension between faith and the streets became the foundation of who he was. He wasn't one or the other, he was both. Man, that mix is what made Nate Dogg special. When he sang, it was like a preacher trapped inside a gangster's body. His voice carried both pain and peace. And trust me, when you hear that combination in music, it hits different. Now check this out, Nate wasn't just hanging around the block. At 17, he made a move nobody expected. He joined the United States Marine Corps. Yeah, Nate Dogg was a Marine. He served as an ammunition specialist, stationed overseas. That discipline, that structure, that sense of focus, it shaped how he carried himself later in the game. Even when fame came knocking, he always had that calm, soldier-like presence, never loud, never fake, just steady. After finishing his service, he came home with one goal in mind, music. And back in Long Beach, destiny was waiting. He reconnected with two friends who would change his life, his cousin Calvin Broadus, the world would know him as Snoop Dogg, and his childhood friend Warren G. Together, they formed the trio 213, named after the area code of their hometown. Picture it, three young men, hungry, broke, but full of ambition. They recorded tracks in bedrooms, garages, anywhere they could plug in a mic. The sound wasn't polished, but it was real gospel soul over G-funk bass lines. Nate's voice stood out instantly. While Snoop had the flow and Warren had the beats, Nate had that tone. Smooth like silk, deep like thunder. Their early demos floated through Long Beach, and word spread fast. Yo, who's that dude singing on the hooks? That was Nate. He wasn't trying to be flashy or famous. He was just doing what he'd always done, singing from the soul. But this time, instead of church pews, it was street corners and backyard parties. That's where it all connected, the holy meets the hood. Nate didn't just sing about the streets, he sang to them. His gospel upbringing gave him a voice that carried emotion. His life on the block gave that voice something real to say. When people talk about Nate Dogg, they often skip this part, the foundation, the faith, the discipline. But man, without the church, without those early lessons in melody and harmony, there would be no Regulate, no next episode, no G-funk sound as we know it. From the church to the block isn't just a phrase, it's his blueprint. It's how he turned struggle into soul, faith into funk, and pain into purpose. That balance defined him, and it's why his music still moves people today. By the early 1990s, Nate Dogg was back in Long Beach with nothing but a dream, a few homemade beats, and that golden voice that refused to be silenced. The 213 crew, Nate, Snoop, and Warren G, were hustling hard, recording demo tapes anywhere they could. No fancy studios, no record deals, just three kids with big dreams and neighborhood stories to tell. Man, if you could have seen those days, the cracked microphones, the cigarette smoke, the sound bleeding through cheap speakers. But when Nate stepped up to sing, everything changed. That voice smooth, soulful, and raw, it made even the roughest gangsters stop and listen. You couldn't fake that kind of tone. It was church soul dipped in street grit. Warren G would later say that Nate's voice was the glue that held everything together. He was right. Because in an era when hip-hop was loud and aggressive, Nate brought melody. He didn't rap, he sang, but he sang about the same pain, the same hustle, the same world. His gift made a gangsta rap feel human, emotional, even spiritual. Those early years were tough, though. The 213 tapes weren't making money. They were getting passed around, traded, copied. But one tape ended up in the hands of Dr. Dre. And when Dre heard that deep, effortless hook floating over a beat, he was like, "Who is this dude?" That moment opened a door that would change Nate's life forever. But before the fame, Nate was still balancing everything: family, street life, trying to survive. He took odd jobs, struggled with bills, and still found time to sing every day. People said he had a quiet confidence. He didn't need to talk much. His music did the talking. He was that type of man who could walk into a room, say nothing, and still have all eyes on him. Influence-wise, Nate always mentioned old-school greats: Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye, and Al Green. You can hear it in the way he bent his notes, the way he carried emotion without forcing it. But he wasn't trying to copy anybody. He was building something new, a sound that would later define an entire coast. And there's something beautiful about how his church upbringing never really left him. Even when he sang about the streets, women, or pain, you could still hear the gospel influence underneath. It was like he was preaching through melody. He once told friends, "Music saved me." And you could tell he meant it. See, Nate didn't have a plan B. Music was the plan. That's why even when the world didn't notice yet, he kept pushing. He didn't chase trends or fame, he just perfected that voice. And that's what makes his story so powerful. He didn't need to scream for attention. He earned it the old-fashioned way by being undeniably good. By the time 1992 rolled around, Death Row Records was rising, Snoop was starting to blow up, and Nate was right there beside him. The sound of Long Beach was about to go global, and that voice from the church pews was about to be heard in every car, club, and radio station across America. From singing hymns to changing hip-hop forever, Nate Dogg's journey was already one for the books. He came from nothing but turned that nothing into something timeless. The voice that started in a Baptist church was now ready to shake the music world, and nothing could stop it. Man, this is where it all took off the moment that voice went from the block to the world. By the early 1990s, hip-hop was shifting. Gangsta rap was exploding. The West Coast was finding its swagger, and Dr. Dre was building a whole new sound, G-Funk. That smooth, bass-heavy, synth-driven vibe that made you nod your head before the lyrics even dropped. And right in the middle of that movement was Nate Dogg, the man who made those beats sing. When Warren G got his hands on a sampler and started producing, he pulled in his two brothers from Long Beach, Snoop and Nate. Together, they started crafting a sound that was soulful but dangerous, melodic but raw. They called themselves 213, a name that repped their city, their area code, their identity. They were family first, artists second. Their early demos floated around until one of them landed on the desk of Dr. Dre. Dre, who had just left NWA and was starting Death Row Records with Suge Knight, was on the hunt for fresh talent. And when he heard that deep, golden voice over Warren G's funky beat, he knew this was different. Nate didn't sound like anyone else. He wasn't trying to out-rap anyone. He was doing something new, singing about the same struggle rappers were talking about. It wasn't long before Dre brought him into the studio. And when Nate laid down his first hook for D's Nuits on Dre's 1992 masterpiece, The Chronic, man, the game changed. People didn't even know his name yet, but they knew that voice. Smooth, confident, effortless, it cut through the smoke and bass like silk over concrete. You could feel it. Then came Ain't No Fun, If the Homies Can't Have None. Yeah, that wild, playful, iconic track on Snoop's Doggy Style album. Nate opened the song like a preacher at a block party, and that single verse became one of the most quoted lines in hip-hop history. Every party, every club, every radio station, the moment that voice hit, you knew what time it was. Man, from there, he was unstoppable. Nate became the go-to man for hooks. If you needed your track to hit, you called Nate Dogg. He wasn't just featuring, he was defining the record. That's how he earned the title, The Hook Man. He sang with power, but never forced it. There was a calm authority in his delivery, like a storyteller who had seen it all but didn't need to brag about it. Then came 1994, the year that changed everything. Warren G released Regulate, featuring Nate Dogg, and it blew the roof off the game. That record was a movie in sound. Nate's opening line, "It was a clear black night, a clear white moon, man," that set the scene instantly. The world had never heard anything like it. The track hit number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went multi-platinum. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who is this voice? But here's the crazy thing, while Regulate made Warren G a household name, Nate didn't get the same spotlight. He was the secret sauce, the magic ingredient, but people often overlooked him as just the guy who sings the hook. Still, Nate never complained. That wasn't his style. He let his music do the talking. After Regulate, he became a key player in the Death Row Records era. You could hear him on The Chronic, Doggy Style, and countless collabs with Tupac, Zibbit, Tha East Sidaz, you name it. His sound was everywhere. And what's wild is, no matter who he worked with, Nate's voice made the track feel complete. He didn't need auto-tune, he didn't need gimmicks, just a mic and that natural tone. People in the industry started saying, "It ain't a hit till Nate Dogg spit." And they meant it. He was getting calls from New York, Atlanta, everywhere. Rappers across the country wanted that West Coast soul. His gift broke regional boundaries. He wasn't just part of hip-hop. He was reshaping it. What made Nate so special wasn't just the notes he sang, it was how he sang them. Every line felt like he was living it. He could make a party record sound spiritual, and a street anthem sound poetic. That's rare, man. He wasn't chasing trends. While others shouted or bragged, Nate brought balance, melody, harmony, and heart. His voice gave gangster rap emotion. And that's why even today, when you hear one of his hooks, it hits deep. It's not nostalgia, it's authenticity. By the mid-1990, Nate Dogg had gone from church pews to platinum plaques. He was now the quiet architect behind some of the biggest records of the decade. And while the world was still figuring out how to categorize him singer, rapper, hook man, Nate just kept making classics. Because for him, it was never about fame. It was about feeling. By the late 1990s, Nate Dogg wasn't just a feature artist anymore, he was a brand. That deep baritone voice was like a seal of approval. If you had Nate Dogg on your track, it meant your record was about to go platinum. Simple as that. But what's wild, man, is that even with all that success, he never acted like a superstar. He was humble, quiet, and real. The same dude from Long Beach who grew up singing in church and hanging with his cousins on the block. After Regulate, his phone didn't stop ringing. Artists from every coast, every label, every genre wanted that Nate Dogg magic. He showed up on tracks with Tupac Dr., Dre, Snoop, Zibbit, and Warren G, but he didn't stop there. By the early 2000s, you could hear Nate's voice everywhere, from Ludacris's Area Codes to 50 Cent's 21 Questions. Both of those records went huge, and let's be honest, his hook carried them straight to the top. Nate had this rare ability to blend with anyone. He could make a gangster track sound smooth or make an R&B record feel street. When he sang, the beat melted around him. Eminem once said Nate had the cleanest tone in hip-hop. And man, that's facts. He was the bridge between worlds, the melody that made rap radio-friendly without softening its grit. He wasn't trying to outshine rappers. He was amplifying them. That's why so many artists trusted him. He'd walk into a studio, listen to the beat once, and then boom, one take, hook done. Legendary producers said Nate could record 3 or 4 songs in one session, and each would sound like a single. But here's the thing, even with all that talent, he stayed underrated. He didn't chase fame. He didn't do interviews, drama, or scandals. He wasn't about that spotlight. He just wanted to make music. And that's the double-edged sword of Nate Dogg's story. The humility that made him beloved also kept him from getting the recognition he truly deserved. He tried going solo, too. In 1998, he dropped G-Funk Classics Volume 1 and 2, two discs of pure Nate Dogg. It had that West Coast soul, those smooth hooks, and a few collabs that still slap today. But the label drama and poor promotion meant it didn't chart the way it should have. Still, real fans know that album was a gem. It showed Nate could carry a project all on his own. Then in 2001, he came back with Music and Me, and that was his statement record. Songs like I Got Love showed the softer, more reflective side of him. It was his way of saying, yeah, I'm the hook man, but I'm also an artist, a storyteller. The critics slept on it, but the streets didn't. To this day, that album holds up like fine wine. Even while working on his solo material, he never turned down a good collaboration. Nate Dogg was like hip-hop's secret weapon. You could find him on soundtracks, mixtapes, R&B features, even video game scores. He made music that crossed boundaries without losing authenticity. And man, every time he sang, you could feel that mixture of confidence and pain. That's what set him apart. He wasn't just hitting notes, he was hitting nerves. He sang about love, loyalty, survival, and street code like someone who'd lived it all. You could tell this was a man who had seen both heaven and hell and still found a way to make it sound beautiful. But while he was racking up hits, fame never sat comfortably with Nate. He didn't crave red carpets or awards. He preferred to stay low-key, spend time with family, and keep it real with his people. He was proud to be from Long Beach, proud to represent the West Coast, proud to be that guy everyone could count on. Yet even as his voice became one of the most recognized in music, the industry still didn't give him his full due. They called him the Hook Man, like that was a small thing, when in reality, Nate Dogg was the reason half those songs became classics. His hooks were more than choruses. They were emotion, energy, identity. He wasn't chasing validation, he was defining an era. Every time that smooth tone dropped on a record, the whole vibe shifted. He made gangsta rap soulful. He made R&B fearless. He was the heartbeat behind the beat. Nate Dogg didn't just sing hooks. He was the hook. Man, if you were alive in the mid-1990s, you felt it, that wave, that bounce, that smooth California sound that made the whole world lean back. The G-Funk era wasn't just a genre, it was a lifestyle. Lowriders cruising down Crenshaw, bass lines shaking the block, and hooks that made even the hardest thugs start humming along. And right at the center of it all stood one man, Nate Dogg, the voice, the calm in the chaos, the soul of the West Coast. By 1994, G-Funk had exploded. Dr. Dre's The Chronic changed everything, and Snoop's Doggy Style turned the movement into a cultural earthquake. Every beat carried that laid-back menace, that talkbox synth, that groove that felt both church and street. And in the middle of all those iconic records, Nate's voice became the glue, the sound that gave West Coast rap its melody, its humanity, its signature flavor. When Regulate hit the charts, it wasn't just a song, it was a statement. Nate Dogg and Warren G created something cinematic, something eternal. That intro line, "It was a clear black night, a clear white moon," didn't just open a song, it painted a picture. People around the world could see it, feel it, live it. The song became one of the biggest hits of 1994, earning Grammy nominations and pushing G-Funk to the mainstream. But while Warren G became a household name, Nate stayed quiet in the shadows, letting that voice do all the talking. And man, what a voice it was. Smooth yet commanding, soothing yet dangerous. When Nate sang, it didn't sound like he was trying, it sounded like truth. He had that old-school soul power inside a street shell. You could hear gospel, blues, and pain all at once. And that's what made him different from anyone else in the game. After Regulate, Nate became the go-to voice for every anthem coming out of the West. He lit up tracks like Lay Low, Nobody Does It Better, The Next Episode, and Bitch Please. Each hook felt like a sermon, confident, addictive, unforgettable. Smoke weed every day became one of the most quoted lines in hip-hop history. But what people sometimes missed is that Nate wasn't glorifying, he was storytelling. He brought melody to madness, order to chaos. The West Coast had its kings. Dre was the architect, Snoop was the personality, Tupac was the prophet. But Nate Dogg, he was the soul. He made the music feel. And the crazy thing is, he never changed. Fame didn't make him louder, it made him smoother. He'd show up to the studio calm, collected, maybe cracking a quiet joke, then step into the booth and turn a beat into a masterpiece. During those peak years, he was everywhere. Artists from across the country, from Jay-Z to Missy Elliott to Ludacris, wanted a piece of that G-funk magic. Nate didn't discriminate. He could jump on a hardcore gangsta track, then turn around and bless an R&B single without missing a beat. That versatility kept him booked solid. But let's be real, the G-funk era wasn't all sunshine. Death Row Records, the label that built the empire, was a wild ride. Suge Knight ran it with fear and control. There was money, there was fame, but there was also danger. Nate saw it all: the late-night sessions, the tension, the violence that came with success. Through it all, he stayed professional. Never messy, never caught in the drama. That's why everyone respected him. The peak of his career wasn't just about hits, it was about impact. Nate Dogg gave West Coast rap something it had never had before: soul with swagger. He made hooks into an art form. Before him, a chorus was just a pause between verses. After him, it became the heart of the song. He taught the industry that a hook could be as powerful as a verse, maybe even more. Man, think about how many hits owe their life to his voice. Regulate. The next episode, Area Codes, 21 Questions. Without Nate Dogg, they don't hit the same. Without that tone, those songs lose their identity. He didn't just contribute, he defined the feel of an entire generation. By the late 1990s, you couldn't turn on the radio without hearing Nate. Even songs where he wasn't credited had his influence written all over them. Thank You, Dollar Dollar Ein, Akon, and Anderson. Pac would later call him their biggest inspiration, and you can hear why. Nate made it cool for gangsters to sing, for rappers to show emotion, for hip-hop to have melody. That's legacy work, right there. But even as he climbed higher, the recognition didn't match the influence. Awards passed him by, critics downplayed his contribution, and labels sometimes failed to give him his credit. Still, Nate never chased trophies. He didn't need them. His validation came every time a crowd screamed his hook word for word. So yeah, the golden era of G-Funk wasn't just about the West Coast shining, it was about a man who brought soul to the streets. The preacher's son who turned hip-hop into harmony, the calm voice that made chaos sound like music. That's Nate Dogg's magic, man. That's why, even now, when one of his hooks drops, you can't help but say nobody does it better. Man, you'd think with a voice like Nate Dogg's, that voice that defined the sound of an entire generation, the world would have treated him like royalty. But nah, the music game doesn't always reward the real ones. Fame? It came, sure. But fairness? Not so much. By the late 1990s, Nate Dogg had already become a legend to the fans. But inside the industry, things weren't adding up. While his hooks made records go platinum, the checks didn't always match. The contracts were messy, the credits were inconsistent, and labels often downplayed his role. He was the heart of the song, but on paper, he was just a feature. See, that's the thing about the industry. It'll use your magic to sell millions, but won't always give you your flowers. Nate didn't complain much, though. He wasn't the type to chase headlines or drama. He just wanted to make good music and take care of his people. Still, you could tell it weighed on him. He'd see others get awards for songs he helped build, for sounds he helped invent. And then there was Death Row. That label was both a blessing and a curse. It made him famous, no doubt, but it was chaos. Suge Knight's empire had money, muscle, and madness, all mixed together. People around Nate later said that while he respected Dre and loved working with Snoop, he hated the constant tension, the fights, the egos, the politics. Nate was calm by nature. The drama just wasn't his scene. When Death Row started crumbling in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Nate found himself drifting between labels. He was too talented to disappear, but without stable backing, he had to grind harder to keep his name alive. That's when you'd see him popping up everywhere on Ludacris records, on 50 Cent's chart toppers, on Eminem's soundtracks. He became the most reliable voice in hip-hop, but still, somehow, the most underrated. Let's be real, he carried the hook game on his back. Area Codes was a cultural moment. 21 Questions with 50 Cent, pure magic. That hook turned a hardcore rapper into a crossover superstar. 50 once said that song worked because of Nate's warmth, that balance between street and soul. But even then, the spotlight always seemed to stop one step short of Nate. He wasn't bitter, though, just more cautious. He started paying attention to business, making sure he got his masters, his royalties, his independence. He was smart about it, a quiet businessman behind the mic. Still, the grind was taking its toll. Between the endless touring, the legal battles, and the weight of never getting full credit, you could sense fatigue creeping in. And the public? They loved Nate, but they didn't see Nate. To fans, he was this mysterious, legendary figure who showed up, dropped a perfect hook, and vanished. Few knew what he was really going through: the pressure, the exhaustion, the health issues starting to knock at the door. But that's how it is in music, man. The ones who hold the culture together don't always get the love they deserve. People remember the faces, not the foundation. Nate was the foundation. Every chorus, every sing-along, every radio anthem in that era had a piece of him in it. And through it all, he stayed solid. No scandals, no fake beefs, no public meltdowns. Just consistency. He gave everything to the music, even when the music industry didn't give much back. By the early 2000s, Nate Dogg had built a career every singer dreamed of: platinum records, legendary collabs, respect from every corner of the game. But behind the fame, there was fatigue. Behind the hits, there was hurt. He'd brought melody to hip-hop, humanity to the hustle, and soul to the streets, and yet, somehow, he was still fighting for fairness. That's the tragedy of being underrated. You can change the sound of the culture and still feel invisible. Man, when you talk about Nate Dogg, you can't just talk about the hits, you gotta talk about the hurt. Because behind that cool voice, that calm smile, there was a storm brewing. And it's one of those stories that hits you right in the chest, the kind that reminds you that fame can't save a soul in pain. By the mid-2000s, Nate Dogg was still making music, still touring, still lending his voice to hit after hit. But the energy wasn't the same. He'd been in this game for over a decade, from the wild death row days to the G-Funk takeover, and all that stress, all those years of late nights and pressure, were starting to take a toll. The music industry moves fast, man, and if you don't slow down, it'll break you before you even see it coming. Around 2007, Nate suffered his first stroke. It came out of nowhere, shocking everyone who knew him. One day he was performing, the next, he was in the hospital fighting to speak and move again. Fans didn't hear much about it at first. Nate wasn't the type to go public with his pain. But those close to him said it changed everything. His body slowed down, his face lost some movement, and that once mighty voice, the voice that carried hip-hop for a decade, became faint. Still, he refused to give up. That's the kind of man Nate Dogg was. He'd spent his life overcoming from the streets of Long Beach to the battlegrounds of the Marines, to the chaos of death row. A stroke wasn't going to stop him, at least not without a fight. He started therapy, tried to regain strength, and even talked about getting back in the studio once he recovered. But the truth? His health was never quite the same. Then, in 2008, it happened again, a second stroke. And this one hit harder. It left him partially paralyzed, unable to speak, unable to move the way he used to. For a man whose voice was his identity, that was a cruel twist of fate. Imagine that the same voice that made the world sing along now trapped in silence. That's something you wouldn't wish on anyone. Family and friends rallied around him. Warren G., Snoop, and the Long Beach community tried to help however they could. But the damage was deep. Nate spent most of his final years in rehabilitation centers, fighting to recover. And while some fans thought he had just stepped away from music, the reality was far more heartbreaking. He simply couldn't perform anymore. What makes this chapter even sadder is how little support he got from the industry he helped build. There were stories of unpaid medical bills, of people who'd once called him brother, not checking in when things got rough. The same industry that celebrated his voice fell quiet when he needed help the most. Some close to him said he felt betrayed not by his fans, but by the business that had used him up. He once said, "I never wanted to be the biggest, I just wanted to be respected." And man, that line hits different when you realize how his story ended. During those last years, fans online kept asking, "Where's Nate Dogg? What happened to him?" When news finally broke about his condition, the outpouring of love was huge. People around the world shared stories about how his music shaped their lives, how his voice made them feel something real. But while the love came pouring in, Nate was living quietly, surrounded by family, still fighting. Physically, he was weak, but mentally, he was strong. Warren G. said he'd still crack smiles, still nod to music, still keep faith. That's who Nate was, a fighter. Even when his own body turned against him, he carried that calm, unbreakable spirit that made him who he was. But man, those final years were tough. The financial strain, the emotional toll, the silence, it all weighed heavy. Some say he found peace in prayer. Others say he found it in memories of the studio, when he was surrounded by friends, beats, and laughter. Whatever it was, he held on as long as he could. Then came the 15th of March, 2011. Nate Dogg passed away in Long Beach, California, at just 41 years old. The official cause was complications from multiple strokes. The news spread fast, and for a moment, the whole hip-hop world stopped. Snoop posted tributes. Dre paid his respects. Warren G. broke down on stage, performing "Regulate." Fans everywhere mourned the loss of a voice that had defined their youth. It wasn't just that Nate Dogg died young, it was that someone so genuine, so talented, never got to see how much he truly meant to people. His passing hit hard because it felt unfair. This man gave the world melody, groove, and soul. And in the end, the same world forgot to check if he was okay. Behind that smooth smile, Nate carried pain that few ever saw. He lived through the madness of the music industry, survived the streets, and built a legacy from scratch. But the cost was heavy. His story reminds us that sometimes even legends can break. And yet, even in tragedy, his name never lost its weight. Because when you think about hip-hop, when you think about that golden G-funk sound, you hear Nate Dogg. His body may have gone silent, but his voice, it never did. Man, after Nate Dogg passed in 2011, you'd think the world would finally give him the peace and respect he deserved. But the truth? The drama didn't stop when the music did. What happened afterward only proved what so many artists had been saying for years: the music industry can love you when you're shining, then forget you when the lights go out. In the weeks following his death, tributes poured in. Snoop called him a true legend of the game. Warren G. said, "I lost my brother." Dre said it felt like losing a piece of G-funk itself. But behind all the love and hashtags, something darker started surfacing: money, control, and chaos. Nate didn't leave behind massive fortune. Despite selling millions, much of that money never reached him the way it should have. Old contracts, shady deals, and years of industry neglect left his estate in disarray. Reports came out about disputes between family members and former associates. Questions about who controlled his music, who collected royalties, and who had the right to his image filled the headline. For fans, it was confusing. For those who loved him, it was painful. The man who gave so much to hip-hop was now being pulled apart by paperwork and greed. Some of the people closest to him said it straight. The industry failed Nate Dogg. They didn't take care of him when he was sick. They didn't show up when the bills piled up. But once he was gone, everyone wanted to claim a piece of his legacy. That's the curse, the system that praises you for your hits but abandons you when you need help. Fans online were furious. Comment sections lit up with anger and heartbreak. They should have helped him. He made them rich, and they left him behind. Man, this ain't right. It wasn't just about Nate anymore, it was about every artist who'd been used, forgotten, and replaced. Nate Dogg became a symbol of something bigger, the human cost of the industry. But through all the noise, his real friends, Snoop, Warren, and a few others, made sure the world didn't forget who he really was. They kept his music alive, shouted his name on stage, and honored him in every way possible. You could feel the love every time Snoop performed "Ain't No Fun" or Warren dropped "Regulate." Those songs weren't just hits anymore, they were tributes. And man, fans never stopped loving him. Even a decade later, new generations discovered his voice through streaming. Kids who weren't even born when G-Funk ruled the radio still recognize that sound. Because Nate Dogg wasn't just a man, he was a feeling. The industry curse isn't just about contracts or royalties, it's about the way we forget people while they're still here. Nate Dogg gave everything to the music, but the music world didn't always give back. And that's something hip-hop still struggles with today, protecting the ones who built it. Nate's story became a reminder. Legends deserve better while they're living, not just flowers when they're gone. He may have been taken too soon, but his story continues to spark conversations about ownership, respect, and care in the music business. So yeah, the industry might have cursed him with unfairness, but the people, the fans, the artists, the streets, they blessed him with eternal love. Because no matter how many legal battles or corporate games tried to cloud his name, one truth stands clear. Nate Dogg will forever be the king of hooks. Man, when Nate Dogg left this world in 2011, it felt like hip-hop lost its harmony. But here's the thing, legends like Nate never really die. His body might have gone, but that voice? That smooth, deep, soulful tone that made gangstas sing and churches nod? It never left. It's still echoing through car speakers, block parties, and the hearts of everyone who grew up on that G-funk sound. After his passing, something beautiful happened. The world finally started to understand how important he really was. The same industry that once overlooked him began to call him what he always had been, a pioneer. Artists from every coast and every genre gave props. Snoop Dogg said, "He made it cool to sing in the hood." Warren G said, "Without Nate, there is no G-funk." Even 50 Cent admitted, Nate Dogg made 21 Questions a classic. Without him, it's just another song. And he wasn't wrong. Nate's fingerprints are all over hip-hop. From the 1990 to today, every artist who mixes melody and street truth owes something to him. Thank you $dollar Ain Anderson, Pac, Roddy Rick, Akon, even T-Pain, they all carry pieces of Nate Dogg's DNA in their sound. That smooth delivery, that effortless balance between tough and tender, came straight from Nate. He was the blueprint. The crazy part? His voice keeps living through samples and tributes. You'll catch his lines popping up in new records, his hooks replayed in remixes, his name dropped by rappers who grew up idolizing him. Songs like Regulate, The Next Episode, and Area Codes still hit just as hard today because they're timeless. They remind you of an era when the music felt alive, when every beat told a story and every hook had a heart. Fans never forgot either. You look at YouTube comments, social media posts, or tribute threads, and it's all love. Nobody does it better. The king of hooks forever. Rip Nate, the voice that raised a generation. That's real legacy. It's not about chart numbers or trophies, it's about impact. And Nate Dogg's impact runs deep. His album Music and Me found a second life too. Years after its release, people rediscovered it and realized how ahead of its time it was soulful, vulnerable, and true to who he was. The same goes for his work with 213. Those early tracks now sound like history lessons, raw, unfiltered, and filled with the spark that would ignite a movement. Even outside the music, Nate became a cultural symbol. You see murals of him in Long Beach and LA, smiling in sunglasses, microphone in hand, immortalized on walls next to Snoop, Dre, and Pac. Every year, fans organize tributes, play his songs loud, and celebrate his life. In Long Beach, his hometown, they talk about him like family, the neighborhood kid who made it big but never forgot where he came from. And that's what made Nate so special, man. He didn't chase fame. He didn't try to fit the mold. He just was. Authentic, grounded, real. That's why his music still feels honest. You can hear the church, the struggle, and the street all living in his voice. That's something no auto-tune, no new trend, no algorithm can replicate. They say time erases names, but not this one. Because Nate Dogg wasn't just part of the sound, he was the sound. Every time a rapper sings a hook with soul, every time a West Coast track rides that lazy funk groove, you can feel Nate in the mix. In a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, his story stands as a reminder. Greatness doesn't always come with trophies or headlines. Sometimes it comes with a voice that makes people feel. So yeah, Nate Dogg may have been underrated in life, but in legacy, he's untouchable. His music didn't fade, it evolved. His influence didn't stop, it multiplied. His voice didn't, it became eternal. Because truth be told, you can silence the man, but you can't silence the melody. And that's why, all these years later, when that familiar line drops, "Hold up, hey," The world still smiles, nods their head, and says, "Rest easy, King. Nobody does it better." Man, when you look back on Nate Dogg's story, from the church pews of Long Beach to the studios of Death Row, from the top of the charts to the silence of his final years, you realize something powerful. He didn't just make music, he made moments. His voice wasn't background noise, it was the backbone of a generation. Nate Dogg represented a rare kind of artist, one who could be surrounded by chaos and still sound calm. While others shouted for attention, he just sang his truth. Every note carried the weight of the streets, the faith of the church, and the peace of a man who knew who he was. That's why his music still feels alive today. You can play Regulate, Next Episode, or Area Codes, and it still hits like it's brand new. He was the glue of the West Coast, the voice that made Dre's beats breathe, the one who turned Snoop's rhymes into anthems, and the man who gave 50 Cent his first real crossover hit. But through it all, Nate never changed. He never tried to be flashy or controversial. He stayed grounded, stayed real, stayed him. That's what made people love him even more after he was gone. There's a quote that floats around hip-hop circles. "It ain't a hit till Nate Dogg spit." And honestly, that's not just a saying, it's a fact. Because Nate didn't just sing hooks. He transformed them into emotion. He gave songs a heartbeat. Without him, a lot of those records would have just been noise. With him, they became classics. And that's the mark of true greatness, man. The ability to leave something behind that lasts long after you're gone. Nate's legacy lives in every new artist who dares to mix melody with truth, in every soulful hook that rides a heavy beat, and in every listener who closes their eyes and smiles when that familiar voice comes on. Sometimes, the world doesn't give legends their flowers while they're here, but the beauty of art is that it outlives the world's short memory. And now, more than ever, people are recognizing what Nate Dogg really was, not just a singer, not just a feature, but a founding pillar of the sound that shaped modern hip-hop and R&B. So maybe he didn't get all the awards. Maybe his name wasn't always in the headlines. But you know what? He didn't need that. His voice spoke louder than any trophy ever could. His influence stretched further than any chart could measure. Every time someone sings a hook with soul, every time a rapper adds melody to their bars, every time a beat drops and that West Coast groove kicks in, that's Nate Dogg. He's there, in spirit, in rhythm, in memory. So, let's ask the real question, was Nate Dogg the most underrated voice in hip-hop history? Some will argue yes, others might debate, but one thing's for sure, nobody else could do what he did. Nobody else made the streets sing like that. Nobody else balanced gospel and gangsta so effortlessly. His story may have ended too soon, but his sound, it's eternal. Because when you hear that voice, that calm, confident, unmistakable tone, you remember why we fell in love with hip-hop in the first place. Nate Dogg's name might have faded from the charts, but his presence never left our hearts. The man is gone, but the music, the memories, the melodies, they live forever. Rest easy, Nate. You'll always be the king of hooks. Forever and always.